"You're just overreacting, Clara." That's what my mother said, her tone flat as she reached for the salt, like she hadn't just brushed my heart aside with 6 words. The table went quiet for half a second. Then my brother laughed, talking about how his boss had finally noticed his potential. Everyone leaned in like it was headline news. My plate stayed full. The food tasted like cardboard. I looked at them, wondering if any of them remembered what day it was. No one did. I stared at the half-melted candle in the center of the table, its wax spilling onto the cheap tablecloth, and realized they had forgotten my graduation. 4 years of study, late nights, and part-time work to keep myself afloat, erased by their casual indifference. My brother, Evan, bragged about getting a recognition certificate for teamwork. My mother clapped like it was the Nobel Prize. My father nodded and said, "That's how success starts." No one looked at me. I kept my voice steady. "I graduated today." My mother blinked, confused. "Oh, that was today?" Evan grinned. "You didn't tell anyone." "I did," I said quietly. "Last week. And yesterday." My father sighed, not even lifting his head. "You know how busy everyone's been. Don't make a big deal out of it." I felt something close behind my ribs. Not anger yet, just that quiet kind of emptiness that hums in the space where love should have been. I swallowed it down and smiled, because that's what they expected. "My name is Clara Johns. I'm 26 years old, an architect from Chicago. I worked 2 jobs to make it through college. I sent them every update, every milestone, hoping one of them would show up. But they didn't. Sometimes, I think I stopped expecting love the day I learned to earn it instead." My father finally looked up. "You should have reminded us in the morning. You know your mom forgets things." "I shouldn't have to remind you about something that matters to me," I said. He gave a short laugh. "Don't take everything so personally, Clara. You're too sensitive." Too sensitive. I'd heard that phrase all my life, every time they ignored me, dismissed me, or let Evan's needs swallow mine. I used to think maybe they were right. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe it was my fault for wanting to be seen. But tonight, as I sat surrounded by laughter that had no room for me, I felt the truth settle like dust. I wasn't too much. They were just too little. I pushed the food around my plate, pretending I wasn't dying inside. My mother leaned toward Evan, smiling. "Your boss must adore you. You've always been such a people person." He winked. "Guess it runs in the family." I almost laughed. It didn't. I excused myself to clear the table, but my mother waved me off. "Leave it, Clara. You'll probably spill something." The words landed softly, but they carried years of quiet disrespect. My hands curled under the table, nails pressing into my palms. The room smelled of overcooked chicken and burnt candles. The air was heavy with small talk. I realized I could disappear right then, and no one would notice until the dishes piled up. Evan reached for my phone, which I'd left beside my plate. "Hey, you got a message. Want me to check?" I pulled it back gently. "No thanks," he shrugged. "Just trying to help." I smiled faintly. "You've done enough." They all laughed at something I didn't hear. My voice had become background noise in my own family. I sat back, letting the chatter wash over me. Their faces blurred. My father's phone kept lighting up. My mother scrolled through pictures of Evan and his girlfriend, showing everyone like proud parents. Not once did they ask how my day had gone. Not once did they ask if I was happy. Later, when they stood to leave the table, my mother turned to me. "Don't sulk, honey. You know we love you. You just need to toughen up." Love, I thought, whatever they meant by that word. It wasn't the same thing I'd been chasing all these years. I went to my room after they left. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the cap and gown hanging from my closet door. The tag still said, "Congratulations." The silence pressed against me until I could almost hear it breathing. I checked my phone. Nothing from them, not a message, not a call, only an email from my firm, a new project assignment. I smiled to myself, just a little. Maybe that's where my family was now. The work, the late nights, the part of me that didn't need applause. Still, there was a sting I couldn't shake. When you've been invisible for so long, even peace feels like rejection at first. It's strange how silence can hurt more than words. If you've ever been the invisible one in your own family, you'll understand. Stay with me. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The laughter from downstairs faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I thought about how I'd spent years earning degrees, promotions, and respect, only to realize I'd never earned their attention. Maybe it wasn't something you could earn. Maybe love shouldn't require proof. My father's footsteps passed by my door. For a moment, I thought he might knock. He didn't. The sound trailed off, followed by the creak of his chair in the living room. I knew the pattern. He'd stay up watching TV until he fell asleep, phone in hand, always waiting for someone else to need him. I looked at that phone on the table and felt a dull, quiet certainty. It wouldn't be long before it rang for me. Not for love, not for pride, but for help. Money, maybe. Favors. Something convenient. They always remembered me when I could fix their mistakes. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just aware, like the moment before rain, when the air turns sharp and still. I didn't know it then, but that night was the last time I'd ever wait for them to notice me first. Downstairs, the laughter started again. I heard my mother say, "Clara's got to learn not to take things so seriously." And my father replied, "She'll understand once she's older." I smiled into the dark. Maybe I already did. The auditorium lights had burned bright that morning, but I remember feeling cold. My hands were shaking when they called my name. Not from nerves, but from the quiet knowledge that no one I loved was there to see it. The row of seats I'd saved for my parents and my brother stayed empty. I checked them twice before the ceremony began. The ticket envelope I'd mailed home still sat in my purse, folded like a small, useless hope. I smiled for the cameras anyway, because that's what you do when you've learned not to expect anyone to show up. When I walked across the stage, the applause felt like it belonged to someone else. My professor shook my hand and whispered, "You did it, Clara." I nodded, pretending the lump in my throat was just pride. I wanted so badly to believe that the moment meant something. Top of my class, scholarship winner, the first in our family to finish a master's degree. I waited for the joy to settle in, but all I felt was the echo of absence. Afterward, I walked out into the sunlight and saw families taking pictures. Mothers crying, fathers holding bouquets, friends laughing with arms around each other. I stood there, clutching my diploma, until it started to feel like a prop. A group of classmates invited me to join their photos, but I declined with a polite smile. I told them my family was running late. It was easier to lie than admit the truth. I sat on a bench near the campus fountain and stared at my phone. No calls, no messages. Just an automated reminder from my bank. I opened our family group chat and typed, "Graduation went well. Wish you could have been here." Then I deleted it, rewrote it softer, like I was the one apologizing. Graduation was today. Everything went great. Hope everyone's doing okay. I pressed send and waited. Hours passed before I got a single reply. It was from my brother, Evan. "Mom's tired. Long day." That was it. No congratulations, no emoji, just 3 words that explained nothing and said everything. I typed, "Hope she feels better," and locked my screen. I told myself not to cry, but the tears came anyway. They didn't feel dramatic or cinematic, just quiet, exhausted. The kind that don't even fall, they just sit heavy in your chest. I wiped my face and laughed at myself for thinking the day would be different. On the way home, I stopped at a small cafe near the station and ordered a slice of cake. The waiter asked if it was a special occasion. I hesitated, then said, "Kind of." He smiled and wished me congratulations without knowing what for. That single word from a stranger felt warmer than anything I'd heard from my family in years. When I got home, the house was dark. My parents were out. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and something reheated. A note on the counter said, "Dinner in the fridge." I stood there for a long time, reading it over and over. Not one word about the ceremony, not even a question about how it went. I changed into sweatpants and sat at the table, still wearing the small silver bracelet my aunt had given me before she moved out of state. She was the only one who had called that week to ask about the big day. I wondered if she'd remember again. I checked my phone and saw one new notification. A text. For a moment, I let myself believe it might be them. It wasn't. It was an ad from my service provider. That night, I decided to send a message anyway. Graduation went well today. I missed you guys. I kept it short. I didn't want to sound needy. It took my mother 3 hours to reply. That's nice, honey. Sorry we couldn't make it. Things have been hectic. Hectic. The word made me laugh. They'd had 6 months' notice. My father had promised to take the day off. Evan had said he'd drive them. They always had reasons that sounded reasonable until you looked close enough to see the truth. I wasn't a priority. Before going to bed, I checked my email. There was one message labeled congratulations. My heart jumped until I saw who it was from. My father's colleague, David. Your dad told me about your graduation. Congratulations, he's very proud. My stomach turned. My father hadn't even mentioned it to me, but he'd managed to tell someone at work. I stared at the message for a long time, torn between anger and disbelief. Proud? That word didn't belong to him anymore. I didn't reply. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a while, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The silence in the house had a weight to it. It pressed down on me, but it also made things clear. I wasn't invisible by accident. I'd been trained to be quiet, to stay small, to keep proving I was worth the space I took. That night, I stopped believing their love was something I had to earn. The next morning, my mother knocked on my door as if nothing had happened. We saved you some coffee, she said. Her voice was casual, almost kind. I wanted to ask if she'd even read my message, if she understood what she'd missed. Instead, I just said, "Thanks, Mom," and watched her walk away. I sat there holding the cup, staring at the thin steam rising in the light. I realized that I didn't need their applause anymore. What I needed was distance, enough space to see them clearly, to understand that forgetting me wasn't an accident. It was a habit. Still, it hurt. Love doesn't switch off like a light. It fades the way warmth fades after sunset, slowly, beautifully, and with quiet resistance. I opened my phone one last time before leaving for work. The message from David was still there, glowing on the screen as if to remind me how far they'd go to pretend they cared. I closed it and whispered, "Never again." Then the phone buzzed once more. For a second, my heart leaped, but it wasn't them. It was David again, adding one more line. Your dad asked me to send that message since he's terrible with texts. I smiled at the irony. He could ask someone else to pretend for him, but never speak to me himself. That was the moment I knew something inside me had shifted. I wouldn't beg for attention again. When my phone finally rang, I almost didn't answer. It had been weeks since graduation, weeks since silence. I stared at the screen and saw my father's name. For a moment, my chest tightened the way it used to when I was a kid waiting to be scolded. I told myself to breathe and pressed answer. Hey, Dad, I said. He sounded cheerful, practiced, like he'd been rehearsing this call. Clara, how's my girl doing? I smiled out of habit, even though he couldn't see it. I'm good, I said. Busy with work. There was a pause. I knew that tone, the kind that always came before a favor. That's great, he said. Listen, I was wondering if you could help me out for a bit. My throat went dry. He hadn't asked about my job or my projects or the graduation he forgot. Straight to the point. I asked, what kind of help? He cleared his throat. Your brother's got a new opportunity. Some startup thing. He just needs a little extra cash to get in. You know how it is. Timing's everything. I sat very still, watching the coffee in my mug ripple from the faint vibration of the washing machine. How much is a little? I asked. Not much, he said lightly. Just 5,000. You've always been good with money. You can transfer it to me, and I'll handle it. I felt that old ache in my chest again, the one that comes when you realize your worth only appears when someone needs something. I said quietly, "You know, I just started a new position. That's not pocket change for me." He chuckled, like I was being dramatic. "Come on, Clara, it's not a loan. Think of it as family helping family. Evan would do the same for you." I almost laughed. "Would he?" I asked. There was a pause long enough to hear his breath tighten. "You shouldn't keep score," he said. "We're all family here." That word, family, felt strange coming from him, heavy and empty at the same time. I pressed my lips together and told him I'd send it by the weekend. He thanked me with that smooth voice that always made me feel 12 again, like a kid trying to earn approval. "You've always been the responsible one," he said. "We're proud of you, sweetheart." I wanted to ask when that pride started, before or after the transfer. Instead, I just said, "Thanks, Dad." When the call ended, I sat staring at my phone, my hand frozen over the screen. Something inside me shifted that day. Wasn't hurt anymore. Not in the same way. The pain had turned into something quieter, sharper, like a new awareness. I realized I'd been keeping score all along, just never on paper. So I opened my laptop and created a folder. I named it Family. Inside it, I saved the transfer receipts, the messages, the call logs, everything. Not to hold grudges, but to hold proof. Proof of the pattern I'd ignored for years. That night, I transferred the money. When I texted him that it was done, he replied with a thumbs up emoji. That was all. I stared at it for a while, the tiny yellow hand floating in a gray bubble, and thought about how cheap gratitude had become. My brother didn't message. My mother didn't call. But 2 days later, I saw a picture of them on social media, smiling at a restaurant, celebrating Evan's big move. The caption said, "Proud of our boy for taking chances." I zoomed in on the photo. My father had his arm around Evan. My mother was beaming. There was no mention of me, of who had paid for that toast. I remember feeling a strange calm, not anger, clarity. They would always celebrate him using what I gave. I wasn't their daughter. I was the invisible investor in their happy little family. I printed the photo and slid it into the same folder with the receipts. My stomach twisted, but I kept moving, careful and deliberate. If they could treat me like a transaction, I would start keeping track like one. Days later, my mother called. "I heard you helped out your brother," she said sweetly. "That was kind of you." I asked how Evan was doing. She said, "He's thriving. We're so proud of him." Her voice softened, almost as if she remembered she was supposed to care. "You doing okay, honey?" I smiled into the silence. "Better than you think." She didn't catch the meaning. "Good," she said. That's what matters. But it wasn't. What mattered was that I finally saw it, the quiet favoritism dressed up as family love. That weekend, I sat at my desk reviewing my work plans and saw the folder sitting open on my screen. The digital trail of every time they'd reached out. Each call, each transfer, each thankless favor. It wasn't revenge yet, just awareness. But I knew where awareness leads. When people show you who they are long enough, you stop asking for apologies. You start preparing for accountability. I closed the laptop and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. That evening, my father called again. His voice was casual. "Got the money? You're a lifesaver." I asked if he'd talked to Evan about paying me back. He laughed softly. "Don't be silly, he's family." "So am I said. The silence stretched between us. "Of course you are," he said eventually, but his tone gave him away. To him, I was dependable, useful, not equal. I told him I had to go and hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were steady when I set the phone down. I looked around my small apartment, the walls, the plants, the quiet. Everything I had, I'd built without them. For the first time, that truth didn't feel lonely. It felt powerful. I poured myself a glass of water and looked out the window. The city lights blinked below, soft and distant. My phone buzzed again, one last time that night. A notification confirming the transfer had gone through. I whispered into the stillness. They'll never see me the same way again. When my phone finally rang, I almost didn't answer. It had been weeks since graduation, weeks since silence. I stared at the screen and saw my father's name. For a moment, my chest tightened the way it used to when I was a kid waiting to be scolded. I told myself to breathe and pressed answer. "Hey, Dad," I said. He sounded cheerful, practiced, like he'd been rehearsing this call. "Clara, how's my girl doing?" I smiled out of habit, even though he couldn't see it. "I'm good," I said. "Busy with work." There was a pause. I knew that tone, the kind that always came before a favor. "That's great," he said. "Listen, I was wondering if you could help me out for a bit." My throat went dry. He hadn't asked about my job or my projects or the graduation he forgot. Straight to the point, I asked, "What kind of help?" He cleared his throat. "Your brother's got a new opportunity, some startup thing. He just needs a little extra cash to get in. You know how it is. Timing's everything." I sat very still, watching the coffee in my mug ripple from the faint vibration of the washing machine. "How much is a little?" I asked. "Not much," he said lightly. "Just 5,000. You've always been good with money. You can transfer it to me, and I'll handle it." I felt that old ache in my chest again. The one that comes when you realize your worth only appears when someone needs something. I said quietly, "You know I just started a new position. That's not pocket change for me." He chuckled like I was being dramatic. "Come on, Clara, it's not a loan. Think of it as family helping family. Evan would do the same for you." I almost laughed. "Would he?" I asked. There was a pause long enough to hear his breath tighten. "You shouldn't keep score," he said. "We're all family here." That word, family, felt strange coming from him, heavy and empty at the same time. I pressed my lips together and told him I'd send it by the weekend. He thanked me with that smooth voice that always made me feel 12 again, like a kid trying to earn approval. "You've always been the responsible one," he said. "We're proud of you, sweetheart." I wanted to ask when that pride started, before or after the transfer. Instead, I just said, "Thanks, Dad." When the call ended, I sat staring at my phone, my hand frozen over the screen. Something inside me shifted that day. I wasn't hurt anymore, not in the same way. The pain had turned into something quieter, sharper, like a new awareness. I realized I'd been keeping score all along, just never on paper. So I opened my laptop and created a folder. I named it Family. Inside it, I saved the transfer receipts, the messages, the call logs, everything. Not to hold grudges, but to hold proof. Proof of the pattern I'd ignored for years. That night, I transferred the money. When I texted him that it was done, he replied with a thumbs up emoji. That was all. I stared at it for a while, the tiny yellow hand floating in a gray bubble, and thought about how cheap gratitude had become. My brother didn't message. My mother didn't call. But 2 days later, I saw a picture of them on social media, smiling at a restaurant, celebrating Evan's big move. The caption said, "Proud of our boy for taking chances." I zoomed in on the photo. My father had his arm around Evan. My mother was beaming. There was no mention of me, of who had paid for that toast. I remember feeling a strange calm, not anger, clarity. They would always celebrate him using what I gave. I wasn't their daughter. I was the invisible investor in their happy little family. I printed the photo and slid it into the same folder with the receipts. My stomach twisted, but I kept moving, careful and deliberate. If they could treat me like a transaction, I would start keeping track like one. Days later, my mother called. "I heard you helped out your brother," she said sweetly. "That was kind of you." I asked how Evan was doing. She said, "He's thriving. We're so proud of him." Her voice softened, almost as if she remembered she was supposed to care. "You doing okay, honey?" I smiled into the silence. "Better than you think." She didn't catch the meaning. "Good," she said. "That's what matters." But it wasn't. What mattered was that I finally saw it, the quiet favoritism dressed up as family love. That weekend, I sat at my desk, reviewing my work plans, and saw the folder sitting open on my screen. The digital trail of every time they'd reached out. Each call, each transfer, each thankless favor. It wasn't revenge yet, just awareness. But I knew where awareness leads. When people show you who they are long enough, you stop asking for apologies. You start preparing for accountability. I closed the laptop and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. That evening, my father called again. His voice was casual. Got the money. You're a lifesaver. I asked if he'd talked to Evan about paying me back. He laughed softly. Don't be silly. He's family. So am I said. The silence stretched between us. Of course you are, he said eventually. But his tone gave him away. To him, I was dependable, useful, not equal. I told him I had to go and hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were steady when I set the phone down. I looked around my small apartment, the walls, the plants, the quiet. Everything I had, I'd built without them. For the first time, that truth didn't feel lonely. It felt powerful. I poured myself a glass of water and looked out the window. The city lights blinked below, soft and distant. My phone buzzed again, one last time that night, a notification confirming the transfer had gone through. I whispered into the stillness, they'll never see me the same way again. When my boss called me into her office that morning, I thought I was in trouble. She smiled in that calm, knowing way she does and said, "You've earned this, Clara. Effective immediately. You're our new lead architect." For a second, I just stared at her. My mind went blank. The word lead didn't sound real. Then it hit me. I'd done it. Years of quiet work, long nights, and silence from home. And somehow, I'd built something that no one could take from me. I thanked her, probably too softly, but my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice. When I walked out, my coworkers had gathered around my desk with a cake that said, "Congratulations, Clara," in shaky blue frosting. I didn't know they'd planned anything. They clapped, hugged me, made jokes about finally seeing me smile. The air felt light, easy. For once, I wasn't the quiet one in the corner. There was no hidden comparison, no half compliment that turned sharp. Just warmth, real warmth. I stayed late that night, cleaning up the paper plates and confetti someone had thrown over my keyboard. As I turned off the lights, I looked around the office and thought, this is what being seen feels like. Not the kind of attention you beg for, but the kind you earn by showing up every day, even when no one notices. It wasn't love, but it was something close to it. Respect. When I got home, the apartment was quiet. I set the leftover cake on the counter, took a picture of it, and typed a message in the family group chat. Big news today, got promoted to lead architect. I hesitated, staring at the screen. Then I added, it's been a long time coming. I hit send and waited. No reply. Minutes turned into an hour. The screen stayed blank. I scrolled up the chat, noticing how one-sided it looked. Me sending updates, them reacting when it suited them. I'd convinced myself those short replies meant they cared in their own way, but now I saw it differently. Care doesn't vanish when it's inconvenient. I ate the cake alone. It was too sweet, but I didn't mind. Around midnight, I set my phone face down and whispered, enough. That one word felt heavier than any apology they could ever give. I stopped sending reminders after that. No texts about milestones, no updates about promotions. I wanted to see what silence sounded like when I stopped filling it. The next morning, sunlight hit the side of my face as I sat by the window with my coffee. My phone buzzed. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone remembered. I picked it up. It was my mother. My chest loosened, but only for a breath. "Hey, Mom," I said. She didn't even say hello. "Clara, you're good with color palettes, right? I need help picking decorations for Evan's engagement party." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. "Good morning to you, too," I said quietly. She sighed, impatient. "Don't start, Clara. I just thought you'd want to help your brother. You have an eye for these things." I stared at the window, watching the light dance across the glass. You didn't see my message last night? What message? The one about my promotion. Oh, right. Her voice was flat, distracted. Sorry, honey, I meant to reply. That's great news. That's all? Well, what else should I say? She asked, like emotion was a chore. You're doing well. You've always done well. That's what you're supposed to do. I laughed softly, not out of humor but disbelief. And Evan's engagement party? That's more important than my career? Don't be like that, she said. We're just trying to make it special for him. You know how hard he's been working. I almost asked what she thought I'd been doing all these years, but I stopped myself. There was no point in fighting for space in a room that was never mine to begin with. What do you need from me? I asked instead. Oh, nothing complicated, she said, her tone light again. Just ideas for table settings, maybe some budget help. You know you're better with money than any of us. There it was, the real reason for the call. I smiled to myself, that same practiced polite smile I'd been wearing my whole life. I'll think about it, I said. She sounded pleased. That's my girl, always dependable. Dependable. The word hit harder than I expected. Not loved, not appreciated, just dependable. The one they could lean on, forget, and lean on again when they needed something. After the call, I didn't move for a long time. The mug in my hand went cold. My mind replayed her voice, that casual dismissal wrapped in fake sweetness. I used to think I could change it by doing more, achieving more, giving more. But you can't earn love from people who confuse dependence with affection. Later that evening, I returned to the office for a quick errand. The cleaning crew had already been through, but the smell of frosting still lingered faintly in the air. The cake box sat open on my desk, and someone had written a note on a napkin. You deserve this. I held it for a moment, tracing the words with my thumb. I thought about how strange it was, that strangers could see my worth clearer than my own blood. The thought didn't make me sad this time. It made me calm. I was beginning to understand that family isn't defined by shared DNA. It's defined by who chooses to show up when no one's watching. As I locked the door behind me, my phone buzzed again. A new message from my mother. Don't forget to wear something nice for the engagement. We'll need you early to help set up. I smiled to myself and turned the phone over, screen down. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to respond. The silence felt right. It wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary. And I planned to keep it. I'm so glad you could make it, Clara, my mother said, pressing a kiss to my cheek that barely touched my skin. Her perfume was sharp and familiar, like the air before a storm. I smiled and said, Of course, Mom. That was the polite answer. The real one sat heavy in my chest. I came because not showing up would have given them another story to tell about me. The hall was crowded, full of laughter and clinking glasses. Every table shimmered with gold accents, every smile rehearsed. My brother Evan stood near the stage with his fiancée, Erin, their hands linked, the perfect couple. I hovered at the edge of the crowd, clutching a glass of water while my mother floated from group to group, her voice high and proud. She never once looked my way. I could hear her bragging about the venue, the cake, how Evan had done so well for himself. My father joined her, laughing a little too loudly. I waited for them to notice me, for that moment when a parent's eyes meet yours and say, I see you. It never came. Erin found me first. You look beautiful, she said softly, brushing her hand against my arm. I smiled at her, genuinely. So do you, I said. She had that gentle kind of warmth that didn't feel practiced. For a moment, I was grateful she existed. Someone in this family deserved to have a heart. She leaned closer. I'm glad you came. Evan wasn't sure if you would. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. She laughed quietly, then turned as guests began greeting her. I stood behind her, invisible again, watching the people who used to pinch my cheeks when I was little, now walk right past me. One of my father's old business friends stopped near the table and said, Your son has done wonders, Mark. You must be so proud. And what a generous brother. Funding Clara's education, that's no small thing. My hand froze around my glass. I blinked, thinking I'd misheard. My father grinned. Yeah, Evan's always been like that. He looks after his family. I looked at him, really looked at him, as he said it. His face was calm, confident, like he'd told this lie before. My throat burned. I wanted to speak, to tell the truth right there in front of everyone, but I saw my mother's quick glance, that silent warning she'd used my entire life. Don't make a scene. So I smiled instead, like a good daughter. The man clapped Evan on the shoulder. You're a fine young man. Your sister's lucky to have you. Evan laughed, not embarrassed, not even hesitant. Yeah, well, I try to do what I can. The sound of it made something inside me break in the quietest way possible. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just stood there, pretending to sip my drink while every lie settled on top of me like dust. I walked outside for air. The night was cold, and the lights from the hall spilled across the parking lot. My reflection stared back at me in one of the glass doors, still smiling, still pretending. I'd paid for my degree with scholarships, loans, and sleepless nights. My father had once called it a waste of time when I chose architecture, and now he stood inside, telling the world it was Evan's generosity that got me there. I leaned against the wall, letting the wind cool my face. The laughter from inside floated through the cracks in the door. I could hear my mother saying, "We're just so proud of both of them." The lie had become a family tradition. After a few minutes, I went back in. Erin was cutting the cake, her eyes bright. She saw me and waved me over. "Come here, Clara, we need a picture." I smiled for the camera, my hand resting lightly on Evan's shoulder. He didn't look at me. Someone shouted for a toast, and my father raised his glass. "To family," he said. "To hard work, loyalty, and love." The words hit harder than any insult could. Everyone cheered. I took a small sip of water, my mouth dry. I'd been loyal all my life, but love had never been part of the trade. When the music started, I sat at a corner table, half hidden by the floral arrangement. Erin danced with Evan, her dress glowing under the lights. My mother was laughing with relatives. I felt like a guest in someone else's story. A few people stopped by to greet me. Small talk, polite smiles. One woman said, "You must be so proud of your brother." I said, "I am," and left it at that. Later, when I went to get my coat, I felt a soft hand touch my arm. It was Erin again. Her voice was low. "I didn't know they told people that," she said, "about the tuition thing." I met her eyes. She looked genuinely sorry. "It's fine," I said. "They've been rewriting my story for years." She shook her head. "Still, it's not right." "It's not," I said quietly. "But it's familiar." She hesitated like she wanted to say more, but someone called her name. I gave her a small smile and walked out before she could apologize again. The night air felt cleaner than the room I'd left behind. I stood by my car, letting the sound of music fade into the distance. I thought about all the lies I'd swallowed to keep the peace. Somewhere deep down, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Have you ever realized your family would rather lie about you than admit they overlooked you? Tell me what you'd have done. When my father called again, his voice carried that same casual tone I'd learned to fear. "Clara, sweetheart, I hate to bother you, but I need your help with something." I didn't respond right away. I'd heard that opening line before. It always sounded polite, but underneath it was ownership, the assumption that I'd say yes before he even finished explaining. "What kind of help?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "It's just a short-term thing. I promised Evan I'd pitch in for his honeymoon. He's been working so hard, and I don't want him to stress about money. You know how expensive weddings are these days." My stomach tightened. "So this isn't for you, it's for him." "Well, technically for both of them," he said quickly. "But you know your old man. I'll pay you back once things settle at the firm." He said it like it was a joke, But there was a pause afterward that told me he didn't mean to pay me back at all. I pressed my fingers against my temple. How much are we talking? 20, he said. The word hit harder than I expected. 20,000? He laughed, like my shock was childish. You make good money, don't you? You can swing it. Besides, it's not a gift, just a helping hand until next quarter. I took a slow breath. I'd already lent him money twice that year. Both times he'd promised to return it soon. He hadn't. But I didn't want the argument. I'd learned that asking for fairness in my family always made me the villain. Fine, I said, but I'll handle the transfer myself. I'll need your account details. He hesitated. You don't trust your old man? I trust myself, I said softly. He let out a low chuckle, the kind people use to cover discomfort. That's my girl, always the organized one. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and stared at the blank checkbook in front of me. I didn't feel guilt or resentment anymore, just distance. I opened a new spreadsheet and logged the amount, the date, and the purpose. I titled the document Family Transactions. Then I made the transfer through my business account. The name C. John's Design and Build appeared in the recipient line, a quiet reminder of the life I'd built without them. When the confirmation email came through, I added it to a folder labeled Receipts. That word used to mean groceries, utilities, work expenses. Now it meant evidence, proof that love in my family always came with an invoice. Days passed without a thank you, not even a text. I checked my messages once or twice out of habit, then stopped altogether. I'd started learning to let silence answer for me. A week later, I got a voicemail from my mother. Your father said you helped with the honeymoon fund. That was thoughtful of you, honey. Evan's so lucky to have you as a sister. Her tone was light, almost rehearsed. I played the message twice, trying to catch any real warmth between the words. There was none. The following weekend, I ran into one of my father's cousins at the grocery store. She smiled wide. Your dad was just telling me how proud he is of you. He said you've been so generous lately, always looking out for the family. He said it means the world to him. Generous. That was the word he used when I paid their debts. Proud. That was the word he used when he told others about it. Never to me. I nodded politely. That's nice of him to say. She laughed. He said you insisted on helping pay for Evan's honeymoon. Such gratitude. He said you told him it was the least you could do after everything they've done for you. The cart handle slipped from my hand. I stood there, frozen in the aisle between canned goods and cereal boxes. He said I what? Her smile faded. Oh, maybe I misunderstood. You know how stories go around. I forced a small laugh. Yeah, they do. When I left the store, I sat in my car and let the quiet swallow me. My hands were steady, but my chest felt hollow. Gratitude. That was the story now. Not obligation, not guilt, not manipulation. Gratitude. He was using my money to prove he was a good father. For years, I thought the pain came from being unseen. But that afternoon, I realized it came from being rewritten. Every time I stayed silent, they edited me a little more. That night, I opened the receipts folder again. I scrolled through the files, bank statements, screenshots, messages. I added one more note under the latest transaction. Funds used for Evan's honeymoon, described publicly as an act of gratitude. Then I closed the laptop. The next morning, my father called again, cheerful as ever. I just wanted to say thanks, kiddo. The transfer went through perfectly. You saved the day. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching sunlight fall across the floor. Glad it helped, I said. He chuckled. You've always had such a giving heart. Not really, I said. I just don't like watching people fall apart when I can prevent it. He paused. You make that sound colder than it should. I smiled to myself. Maybe it's just honest. He didn't know what to say to that. I could hear him clear his throat. Anyway, your brother's over the moon. He says he'll bring you a souvenir from the trip. I could picture Evan's grin, the easy confidence of someone who'd never once had to earn what came his way. Tell him not to, I said. I already have enough reminders. He laughed awkwardly, not understanding what I meant. We ended the call soon after. As I washed my coffee mug, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. Calm, distant, and oddly peaceful. The anger that used to shake me had turned into something else. Focus, maybe, or quiet preparation. Weeks later, I heard from another relative that Evan and Aaron were enjoying a lavish honeymoon in Greece. My father had been bragging again, saying, Clara's gratitude helped make it possible. I didn't correct him. Not yet. But that night, as I saved a copy of the bank statement to my growing collection, I whispered to myself, keep talking, Dad. One day I'll let your words prove everything for me. When the envelope arrived, I almost threw it away. The handwriting looked old-fashioned, formal, the kind of mail that usually meant paperwork or condolences. But then I saw the return address. Henderson and Lowe, estate attorneys. My hands froze. I hadn't thought about my grandmother's lawyer since the funeral. That was months ago. I sat down at my desk, staring at the cream-colored envelope, my name written neatly in blue ink, Ms. Clara Johns. I turned it over once, twice. My coworkers chatted in the background, but their voices blurred into static. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it carefully, afraid it might tear. Inside was a folded letter and a check clipped to the corner. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, her scent. My chest tightened. The letter began simply. My dear Clara, I hadn't realized how much I missed hearing those words. Everyone else just called me sweetheart or honey, always in a tone that felt more like dismissal than affection. But Grandma never spoke down to me. She saw me, even when no one else did. I started reading. I know this may come as a surprise, but I've made arrangements for you to receive a portion of my estate separately. This isn't about money, though there will be some. It's about recognition, something you were rarely given. I saw what they did, even when you pretended not to mind. The favoritism, the silence, the taking. I wanted to leave you something that was yours alone. My eyes blurred for a moment. I blinked hard, forcing the words back into focus. You have my home, my savings, and what remains of my trust account. Use them not to survive, but to build. Build something of your own, something with your name on it. And please, don't tell them yet. Let peace come to you first, then decide what they deserve to know. The letter ended the same way every one of her birthday cards used to. With love you never had to earn. Grandma Ruth. I didn't cry. I just sat there with the paper in my hands, staring at her looping signature. For years, I'd wondered if anyone in my family ever saw me, really saw me, or if I'd simply existed as the one who filled in the gaps. And now, here was proof that someone had been watching quietly, taking notes, understanding everything I couldn't say out loud. The check was tucked neatly behind the letter. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. The amount was more than I'd ever had in my account at once, enough to change everything, enough to make silence powerful instead of painful. I leaned back in my chair, the edges of the letter brushing against my palm. My grandmother had never interfered when my parents dismissed me, never corrected them, never argued. I used to think she didn't notice, but now I realized she'd been waiting for the moment she could help me without them, taking it away. Someone knocked on my office door. Everything okay, Clara? I looked up. Yeah, I said softly. Everything's fine. After she left, I closed the door and read the letter again. This time slower. The words felt different the second time, heavier, deliberate. Use them not to survive, but to build. That wasn't just advice. It was direction, permission. I opened my laptop and searched for the property address listed at the bottom of the document. The photos appeared. A small brick house on a quiet street, shutters faded but intact, the yard overgrown yet peaceful. I could almost see her sitting on the porch, knitting or humming to herself. That was her gift. Stillness. Even when my parents argued during holidays, she'd just smile, serving pie like nothing could reach her. I used to think that was passivity. Now I understood it was strength. As I scrolled through the images, I realized something else. No one in my family knew about this. The will must have been written privately, handled separately from the estate they split after the funeral. That silence wasn't oversight. It was intentional. She'd chosen me quietly, the way I'd lived my entire life. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not out of joy exactly, but recognition, the kind that says, "You were right to endure." I reached for my phone, instinctively wanting to call my mother. Then I stopped. I could already imagine her reaction. Surprise, turning to irritation. Then the same clipped tone she used whenever life didn't orbit around Evan. "Why didn't anyone tell us?" she'd say. My father would add, "Well, if it's in your name, we'll figure out how to handle it." Handle it. Like everything else I'd ever earned. No, not this time. I folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. My reflection in the computer screen looked calm, unfamiliar. There was no guilt in the silence, no anxiety about what they'd say when they found out. Just a steady, quiet certainty that something had shifted for good. All afternoon, I worked like usual, but my mind stayed on her words. The weight of them anchored me in a way I hadn't felt before. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to them, not even to myself. When evening came, I locked the office and stood outside, the wind brushing through my hair. The city lights flickered against the glass buildings, sharp and distant. I thought about the house again, the faded shutters, the stillness, the possibility. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was a map leading me somewhere my family couldn't follow. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. The seal was torn open, the truth already out, but only for me. They didn't know about this. Not yet. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to keep it that way. "Do you remember your 5th grade report card, Clara? You always tried so hard." My mother had said it once, years ago, during a family dinner, not to praise me, but to make a point about Evan's natural genius. I can still hear her voice, light and fond, floating somewhere above me while my brother grinned across the table. That memory came back to me today, clear as glass, while I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen. The office was quiet, except for the soft hum of air conditioning. I had an open email draft in front of me, my resignation letter. I hadn't typed a single word yet. I just watched the cursor blink, steady and patient, like it was waiting for permission. I thought about all the moments that led here, the report cards I used to line up on the counter, hoping for someone to notice the A's, the birthdays where my cakes had someone else's name on them because it was easier to combine celebrations. The times I'd sit by the window after school watching my parents pull into the driveway an hour later than promised. Empty-handed, no apology. Back then, I told myself they were just busy. Adults always were. I didn't understand that forgetting could become a habit. I looked around my office, the framed designs on the wall, the certificates, the faint smell of coffee and printer ink. Everything in this space had been built by me. Every promotion, every client, every late night. And yet, even now, I could hear my father's voice from years ago. "You're lucky they even hired you right out of school. Architecture is a tough field for women." Lucky. That's what they always called it when I worked for something they didn't believe I could have. I rested my fingers on the keyboard and typed the first few words. "Dear Marcus." After careful thought, I paused. My chest felt tight, not from doubt, but from the strange quiet that comes before freedom. Leaving this firm wasn't about quitting. It was about reclaiming my hours, my focus, my energy. For so long, I'd been surviving on validation crumbs, at work, at home, everywhere. But my grandmother's letter had changed something in me. For the first time, I didn't want their approval. I wanted absence. I deleted the sentence and started again. After years of growth and gratitude, it's time for me to build something new. The words looked solid, unshakable. I wrote slowly, carefully, letting every sentence feel like an anchor dropped in calm water. By the time I reached the closing line, I felt lighter. I saved the draft and leaned back. My reflection in the monitor looked calm, almost unfamiliar. For years, I'd lived reacting to what others needed. Now, I was finally acting on what I needed. A memory flashed in my mind. My 13th birthday. My mother had forgotten to order a cake, so she lit candles on a leftover pie and said, "It's the thought that counts." I'd smiled back and said, "It's fine," even though it wasn't. That moment taught me something I didn't realize until now. Pretending it's fine is just another way of erasing yourself. Exhaled slowly. Maybe it was time to stop doing that. I opened a new folder on my desktop and named it Blueprint. Inside it, I started gathering my portfolio files. My best work, the kind that didn't belong to anyone else. This was what I'd use to launch my own practice, not to prove a point, but to step out from under the shadows that had made me shrink. It felt strange, this calm. It wasn't pride and it wasn't anger. It was clarity, the kind that comes after too much noise. My phone buzzed against the desk. I glanced down at the screen, expecting a client. Instead, it was my mother. The message read, "Sweetheart, can you help us pay the decorator? It's for your brother's housewarming." For a moment, I just stared at it. There was no greeting, no question mark, no acknowledgement of who she was texting. Just another transaction waiting to happen. I imagined the new house, bright, freshly painted, filled with laughter. My money scattered across furniture I'd never sit on, walls I'd never see. My mother, smiling for photos, telling guests how Evan worked so hard to make it all happen. I typed a reply, then deleted it. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't angry. I was simply done. I placed my phone face down on the desk and looked at the glowing screen of my computer again. The resignation letter waited there, open and unfinished. I moved the cursor to the bottom and typed two final words. Effective immediately. For once, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I clicked send and sat there in the stillness that followed. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like starting over. Then slowly, I reached for the envelope my grandmother's lawyer had sent. I unfolded the letter, tracing her handwriting with my fingers. Her words echoed quietly in my mind. Use them not to survive, but to build. I smiled. "I'm building, Grandma," I whispered. The phone buzzed again. Another message from my mother, unread. I turned it over, letting the vibration fade into silence. For the first time, that silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. "I just don't understand what's happened to you lately, Clara." My father's voice cracked through the phone before I'd even said hello. "You used to be helpful. You used to care about this family." I sat at my desk, the phone resting between my ear and shoulder, my fingers tracing the edge of a notebook. "I still care," I said quietly. "I just can't keep doing what you're asking." He exhaled hard, like my words were an inconvenience. "You can't keep doing what? Transferring money? You make more than all of us combined. We're not asking for much." There it was, we. The word that always meant him and my mother, sometimes Evan, never me. "It's not about the money," I said. "It's about what it represents." "What it represents?" His laugh was sharp. "You really started talking like one of those people who thinks they're above their family. You wouldn't even have that job if I hadn't paid for your degree." I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch long enough for him to hear it. "You didn't," I said calmly. "You told people you did, but you didn't." He went quiet. I could almost picture him leaning back in his chair, face tightening, readying the next jab. "So what? You're keeping score now?" "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending the score doesn't exist." That was when his tone shifted, from annoyed to something colder. "You've become ungrateful, Clara. That's what this is. Ever since that promotion, you've been different, distant." "I've been the same," I said. "You just never noticed until I stopped giving." He scoffed. "You make everything sound so dramatic. We're family. Family helps each other." I let the words hang there. I'd heard them all my life, always right before they took something. My time, my peace, my savings. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice again, soft and steady. Let peace come to you first, then decide what they deserve to know. I'm not sending the money, I said finally. Not this time. His response was immediate, like a reflex. Wow, so that's it. You've really turned into one of those cold-hearted people who think money matters more than love. I kept my voice steady. If love only shows up when money does, maybe it was never love. He laughed bitterly. You think you're clever. But when we needed you, who stepped up? Not Evan. You, and now you're throwing that back at us like some spoiled child. I'm not throwing it back, I said. I'm just done pretending it didn't cost me anything. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, filled with all the things he wanted to say but couldn't make sound righteous. Then came the guilt, the old, practiced weapon. You know your mother's been stressed. She's been crying about this. Do you really want to make her feel worse? For a moment, the instinct to apologize rose in me like muscle memory. I could almost hear myself saying sorry, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. But the words never came. I'm sorry she's upset, I said softly, but I'm not responsible for that. Unbelievable, he muttered. You think you're better than us now. You sit up there in your fancy office acting like you don't come from the same people you're looking down on. I'm not looking down, I said. I just finally learned to look straight ahead. That one landed. I could hear it in the silence that followed, the kind that hums like static, dangerous, and unresolved. When he spoke again, his voice was tight with anger. You're going to regret this, Clara. Family doesn't forget. I'm counting on that, I said quietly. I reached for the recording app on my phone, pressed the red circle, and set it beside me on the desk. He kept talking, his voice rising and falling through anger, guilt, and disbelief, a pattern I'd memorized since childhood. I gave you everything, he said, and this is how you repay me? I didn't answer. I just let him fill the silence. His words piled up like dust on old furniture, useless, heavy, and impossible to ignore. When he finally ran out of breath, I said, Are you done? He hesitated. Don't talk to me like that. I'm not talking like anything, I said. I'm just finished being the only one listening. Then I pressed end. The click of the call disconnecting was softer than I expected, but it was the sound of something ending cleanly. I sat there for a while, staring at the quiet phone, feeling the air return to the room. My hands weren't shaking. My chest didn't hurt. I felt light, like oxygen after a long time underwater. I opened the notes app on my phone and labeled the recording. Dad, April 14th. Then I set it aside. Outside, the evening light poured through the window, pale and gentle. For once, I didn't reach for my phone again. I didn't explain myself. I didn't call back. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, my email pinged. The subject line read, Urgent Financial Help. It was from the family group thread. I stared at it for a long moment, watching the bold letters sit there on the screen, untouched. Then I turned off my phone, placed it on the nightstand, and let the silence stay. When people only call you when they need something, what would you call that? Love or convenience? When I filed the paperwork, it felt almost ordinary. Just my name. Well, part of it. On a screen. CJ Design and Build. Simple. Clean. Detached. I dropped the Johns deliberately. I didn't want to see it anymore. The name had been a weight, one that tied me to too many expectations I never agreed to carry. I remember sitting in my small apartment, the same one my father once called temporary, sipping cold coffee as I typed in the business address. It wasn't grand, just a quiet space I rented downtown, 3 blocks from the river, with old brick walls and sunlight that came through slanted blinds. It smelled like dust and new beginnings. I used my grandmother's inheritance to fund it, every cent accounted for, every document in my name. No partnerships, no shared credit lines. Just me. For once, it felt good not to owe anyone an explanation. The early days were slow. I spent hours designing mock proposals, building a portfolio from scratch. I didn't tell anyone, not even friends from my old firm. It wasn't secrecy born from fear, it was peace. I wanted this to grow quietly, without noise or validation. One evening, while finalizing drawings for a community center proposal, I caught myself smiling. The lines on the screen looked different this time. They weren't assignments or deliverables. They were mine. Every curve, every shadow, every measurement felt personal. I wasn't just building a design, I was building distance. I hired a small team, a junior architect named Renee, fresh out of college, and an older project manager, Sam, who'd left a large firm after a layoff. They were kind, grounded people, the kind who listened before they spoke. We worked late nights, fueled by instant noodles and stale coffee, laughing about deadlines that didn't scare us anymore. When the first big opportunity came, I almost didn't apply. A government development project, a civic renewal plan for downtown parks. The brief was public, competitive, and well-funded. I hovered over the submit button for nearly an hour. It felt too big, too soon. Then I thought of my father's voice years ago. Architecture's a tough field for women. That memory didn't sting anymore. It steadied me. I clicked submit. Weeks passed in silence. Renee worried about deadlines. Sam kept revising cost breakdowns just in case. I stayed calm. Maybe that's what happens when you stop expecting permission to succeed. One afternoon, Sam came in holding a printout. "Guess who else is bidding on the same contract?" he said with a small grin. I took the sheet from him, scanning the list of registered firms. There it was, printed in neat bold letters. Johns and Associates, my father's firm. I read it twice, then folded the paper neatly. "We'll win on merit," I said simply. Sam nodded, not realizing how much those words meant to me. That night, I stayed late, reworking our presentation slides. Every detail had to reflect what I believed architecture should be: functional, beautiful, and honest. No pretension, no borrowed credit, just integrity turned into structure. As I worked, I thought about how often my father's firm had used my ideas without credit when I was younger. I used to bring sketches to family dinners, proud to show him what I'd drawn. He'd glance once, then later present similar designs to clients as his own concept. I never said anything back then. I thought that's what daughters did. Stay useful, stay quiet. But now my initials stood where his used to. The presentation day came faster than expected. We weren't invited to pitch in person. Everything was digital. Still, I dressed like I was walking into a boardroom. Black blazer, hair pulled back, quiet confidence in every movement. Renee laughed softly when she saw me. "You look like you already know we've got it." "I don't," I said, closing my laptop, "but it feels like something's finally mine." We submitted the final package and waited. The next few weeks felt like standing in a long hallway with no doors. But I didn't rush it. Good things rarely came fast in my life. They arrived late, but they arrived clean. Then one Monday morning, I woke to a new email notification. The subject line read, "Project Award Confirmation, Civic Renewal Phase 1. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I opened it carefully, scanning every line, until I reached the bolded words, "We are pleased to inform you that CJ Design and Build has been selected as the primary contractor for this project." I sat back and let out a slow breath. For a long time, I didn't move. The city outside my window was waking up. Distant traffic, a passing siren, a morning that looked like every other. But inside, everything had shifted. My company, my win, my work. The irony didn't escape me. My father's firm had bid for the same contract and lost. Somewhere, he was probably sitting in his office, blaming the system, the process, the reviewers. He'd never think to look at the name that replaced his on the shortlist. CJ Design and Build. It was better this way. No confrontation, no announcement, no speech, just results. I closed the email, saving the confirmation to a folder labeled Projects. Then I whispered, half to myself, half to the woman I used to be, "We did it." And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was starting over. I felt like I'd finally arrived. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming." My voice sounded even, professional, detached. I stood at the end of the long conference table, the city skyline behind me, sunlight cutting across the polished wood. The room smelled faintly of coffee and new carpet. They walked in late, my father first, my brother just a few steps behind. Their laughter echoed through the glass doorway before they realized who was standing there. For a moment, no one said a word. "Clara?" My father's voice carried a half laugh, like he was trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "What are you doing here?" I smiled politely. "I'm leading today's session. Please have a seat." Evan blinked, glancing at the company logo projected on the wall. CJ Design and Build. I saw it hit him. The initials, the name, the reality. He looked at me like he'd just seen a stranger wearing my face. They sat down slowly. My father adjusted his tie, pretending to be unbothered. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "this is unexpected." "It shouldn't be," I replied softly. "You bid for this project. So did we. We won." The words hung in the air. I could hear the hum of the ceiling vent, the faint shuffle of papers as my assistant handed out folders. Everything was calm, controlled, exactly how I wanted it. I opened the presentation and began outlining the plan. Site layouts, budget phases, design timelines. My voice stayed steady, every sentence practiced, measured. I didn't look at them often, but I could feel their silence, thick, restless. At one point, I paused to let the client interject. He praised our proposal, saying it was refreshingly thorough. My father's jaw tightened. Evan scribbled something on his notepad just to look busy. When the client excused himself to take a call, the room fell quiet again. My father leaned forward slightly. "You could have told us," he said. "I didn't think it was relevant," I answered. He gave a dry laugh. "Not relevant? Competing against your own family?" I met his gaze. "You stopped calling it family the moment it became business." He looked away first. Evan finally spoke, his tone softer. "Clara, come on. This feels personal." "It's not," I said. "It's professional. That's the difference between us. You mix the two when it suits you. I separate them." His face fell, but I didn't linger on it. I returned to my notes, flipping the next slide on the screen. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. Inside, I felt the strange calm that comes only when something long overdue finally happens. For years, I'd sat at their tables, the quiet helper, the overlooked daughter who balanced their numbers and cleaned up their messes. They told me I was lucky to be there. Today, I didn't feel lucky. I felt capable. The client returned, smiling as he shook my hand. "Excellent work, Ms. Johns," he said. "Your firm's proposal truly stood out." I smiled back, catching the brief flicker in my father's eyes. He'd built his life on being the one who stood out. Now he was just another attendee in my meeting. We wrapped up after an hour. Formalities, signatures, polite goodbyes. I thanked everyone for coming and began gathering my documents. My father stayed seated, watching me quietly. When the room emptied, he finally spoke. "Clara, what have you done?" I paused by the window, sliding my laptop into its case. "I built something you never saw coming." He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. The silence between us was thick, but it wasn't painful anymore. It was proof. I turned toward the door. "You taught me something," I said. "You showed me how to build for others. I just decided to build for myself." As I walked out, my heels clicked softly against the marble floor. Each step felt like the punctuation of a story that had taken too long to write. Outside the conference room, sunlight spilled across the hallway. I could hear their muffled voices inside, confusion, disbelief, maybe regret. But I didn't stop to listen. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their reaction to validate my worth. The proof was already written across the contract they'd lost to me. I sealed the envelope just before midnight. My handwriting looked steadier than I felt. Inside were copies of every transfer, every note, every receipt I had saved. Years of silence stacked into neat, undeniable proof. At the bottom, I placed the final document, a legal notice confirming the transfer of the property deed back to my name. No confrontation, no threats, no speech, just truth delivered in paper form. I wrote the address slowly, letting the pen rest between each word. My family's house, the same one where birthdays felt like obligations and love always came with conditions. I didn't sign the letter with warmth or farewell, only with my initials, C.J. When I walked it to the mailbox outside, the night air felt still, almost forgiving. I dropped the envelope in and stood there for a moment, watching it disappear into the dark slot. That sound, soft, final, felt like closing a door from the inside. Back upstairs, the apartment was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to scare me because it meant I had no one left to please. Now it just sounded clean. My laptop sat open on the counter, the faint glow of the screen catching the edge of a photo frame nearby, one from years ago, all of us smiling at a dinner I paid for. I turned the frame face down. I made tea I didn't really want, just to have something warm in my hands. Part of me wondered what they'd say when the letter arrived. My father would probably deny everything at first. My mother would say I'd embarrass them. Evan would try to sound calm, maybe even reasonable. But the truth doesn't bend for comfort. They'd spent years teaching me that silence was respect. Tonight, silence was my answer. My phone buzzed against the table just as I sat down. A new message from Evan. It said, "You didn't have to go this far." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I placed the phone face down beside the untouched tea. I didn't respond. The invitation came in a plain envelope, handwritten by my mother. No guilt this time, just a single line. Family lunch, Sunday at 1. I went. Not to make peace, I already had that, but to let the silence speak for me. They looked smaller somehow. My father's posture had lost its edge. My mother smiled like she was trying to remember how. We talked about safe things, the weather, my brother's new car, the house renovations. When my father finally asked, "So, how's work?" I reached into my bag. I slid the envelope across the table. "It's going well," I said. He looked confused, then curious. He opened it. Inside was the legal confirmation. My new name. The same initials printed on every blueprint, every signed contract, every project won. CJ Design and Build. My mother's eyes darted to mine. My father's mouth tightened. No one said a word. I finished my water, placed the napkin neatly on the table, and stood. "Thank you for lunch." The clink of my chair against the tile felt like punctuation. I walked out. Light, steady, and whole. That was the last time they ever called me for money. The first morning in my new place felt unreal. No noise, no tension, no one asking for anything. Just sunlight on quiet walls and the faint sound of birds outside. I sat on the floor with my coffee, surrounded by boxes I hadn't rushed to unpack. For the first time, I didn't feel behind. I just felt free. Forgiveness didn't come like lightning. It came slowly, in moments where I stopped replaying old scenes. I didn't forgive them for their peace. I did it for mine. It wasn't forgetting. It was choosing not to carry their weight anymore. The silence that used to hurt now felt like air I could finally breathe. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking of the past, wondering what they told people about me now. Then I'd smile because it didn't matter. I'd built something that didn't need their approval. This afternoon, my phone rang. The name made me pause. Erin. I hadn't heard her voice in months. She sounded different, lighter. "I left Evan," she said quietly, "and I started my own firm. You inspired me, Clara." For a moment, I just listened. Then I said, "Good. You deserve your own peace, too." The auditorium lights were softer than I remembered, warm against the rows of faces watching from the crowd. My name was called. Clara Jameson, founder of CJ Design and Build. And the applause rose like a quiet tide. I walked onto the stage, calm, steady, not performing, just existing. When I looked up, I saw them, my parents, sitting near the back. They looked smaller. Time had trimmed their certainty. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They just watched. For once, I didn't look away. I felt no anger, no ache, just distance that finally made sense. They weren't villains anymore, just people who never learned how to see me. After the ceremony, people congratulated me, asked for photos, told me how much they admired the work. I thanked them, sincerely. My parents stayed seated. I didn't expect them to stand. Walking outside into the evening air, I felt weightless. Vindication wasn't loud. It was quiet, like breathing clean air after years underground. If this story reminded you of someone who underestimated your worth, don't forget to like and subscribe. Not for me, but for every quiet victory we never celebrate. Peace isn't silence. It's finally hearing yourself and realizing that's enough.